So what we're going to talk about today is that moment of maybe you feel some sort of ache coming on, a pain, some soreness. You see that run on the schedule, that swim, that bike on the schedule, and you know in your head, man, my knee was kind of hurting the last time I ran, or maybe this was sore, or that was sore. Help us sort through that moment on kind of distinguishing what is just typical day-to-day training soreness and what might be an injury coming on.
Yeah, and that's a great question because I think a lot of times there's a stigma with triathletes that we just play slave to our training, and very often that's the case where a lot of us are very driven, motivated athletes, and we are type A. We don't want to miss anything. I think the step we have to really uncover is what exactly are we feeling? Is it fatigue? I think most of us understand what fatigue is, where there's just a fullness of the muscles or a general ache that occurs as we're training. But then soreness we start to define more as that 24 to 48 hour period that's more generalized achiness, soreness. Usually that's goes in hand with delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS, that most people understand. But that usually clears no longer than 72 hours. So really you have to look at what you're feeling, the quality of what you're feeling, location, and then the longevity of it. Pain is going to be more in that category of when it's true textbook injury that's leading to pain. We know those are things that are a little bit more specific. They're not changing with increased time. They're going past that 72-hour mark, and obviously then we have to red flag it. But everybody's history is different. Everybody's experience with what they feel is different. So really you just have to stop and listen to what the body's trying to say.
Yeah, so as we do that, I certainly know at this point in my athletic career, I usually have the same 3 or 4 reoccurring injuries. I kind of know what they feel like. I kind of know what the early warning signs of them are. The ripe old age of 35 years old, I haven't had a new injury in quite some time. It's always the same couple. But maybe for an athlete who isn't as often injured as I am, or isn't as familiar with our injuries as I am, what are some of those early warning signs? You mentioned 72 hours. If you're feeling the same thing for longer than 72 hours, is that one thing we should pay attention to? Are there some other things that are early warning signs we should pay attention to, that this might be an injury and not just general soreness?
Yeah, the timeline is one thing, but really I often say that your biggest predictor or your biggest indicator is really the quality of your movement. And we're not talking just about swim, bike, and run movement, but we're talking about just fundamental movement patterns that otherwise you had prior to this feeling or injury that's come on. So for example, squatting, just all the way deep bottom squat, bending forward, hip hinging, just reaching forward to touch your toes, rotating, twisting, rolling, different patterns that normally you would have fundamentally, that all of a sudden you're losing because they're either uncomfortable or they're restricted to where you can't functionally squat, step, lunge, balance, roll, rotate, things like that we start to lose. All of a sudden, if we're losing movement quality without load into those movement patterns, and they're uncomfortable and they hurt, all of a sudden we no longer have a fitness problem. We have a health problem. We have a medical problem. And that's a red flag indicator that those patterns that you previously had should not be gone. So if that's the case and you're experiencing that timeline of 3 days or more with symptoms still persisting despite your best efforts to mitigate those. So, if you're having to live on ibuprofen like a multivitamin every day just to get your workout in, or you're doing drastic things to compensate within your workouts just to overcome them, if that's persisting past 3 days, you really need to red flag it and get help.
I'm curious, kind of getting back to kind of the original question I set out to ask you today, which is for the triathlete at home who's feeling something in their body, feeling something that's not quite right in their body. Oftentimes there's that question of, okay, here's the workout on the schedule. Here's what I'm feeling. What I'm feeling is not necessarily prohibitive to me doing the workout on the schedule. When should we just say, you know what, I'm going to call it today. I shouldn't do this workout. I'm going to back off, versus when is it okay to press on and kind of do that workout anyway?
Yeah, typically what we'll find is that if you're just in that soreness category, like we described earlier, where it's something that you feel discomfort, but we know it's attributed to the normal things that are required for breaking down a muscle and building it up with training, If it's in that category, typically what you're going to notice is an active warm up, light stretching, or as you get further into the activity, it's going to get better. And so that's obviously something you can look at. If that's not occurring and you're finding that the discomfort is getting more intense, it didn't go away with an active warm up or light stretch, your movement quality is still limited. I always say, when in doubt, don't. So you definitely want to limit that activity if that's the case. And if it's getting worse as you go, there's certain things you can modify. You can modify sometimes the duration, the intensity of that session, even if you're feeling some discomfort, but it's not getting worse. I'm okay allowing my athletes to work through that as long as it doesn't get worse during. But then there's really 3 checkpoints you have to check off as you get through that activity. It's, did you have increasing pain that got worse during the activity? If no, great. If you didn't have worse pain at the end of that activity after it's all over, later that night or the next morning, if you can check no on all 3 of those, having modified that activity, I'd say it's okay to keep it on the table. But if you can't check no on all 3 of those counts, even trying to modify that activity, again, it's best to back off that activity for some time. And again, if movement quality is still affected past 3 days, symptoms are still present, don't just lay off and do nothing different. Go seek some professional help or do something specific to correct that. A lot of people assume just taking time off is just going to solve the issue, but the issue is probably still there. Even if you calm things down, it's just going to rear its ugly head at some point later.
I think a lot of triathletes would probably feel more comfortable. It would probably be quicker to get treatment if they kind of knew where to start or where to go to or what questions to ask when they are feeling some sort of ache or pain. So what actionable item, BJ, would you tell us to take when we're feeling some pain? A couple days off of working out hasn't fixed it. What should we do next?
Yeah, that's a great point, Andrew. I think you really, as an athlete, have to be an advocate for yourself, and obviously you're a consumer of your own healthcare. And so there's maybe some resources you could use with coaches or athletes around you that have had good success with certain providers, because really you want somebody that understands what a triathlete goes through, what a triathlete experiences with their training, but also what their motivations are for racing and things like that. So I always joke with my wife that when she's talking, sometimes I will hear her, but I wasn't listening. And sometimes that happens with, unfortunately, where you come across some that they're hearing you, but they're not really listening. And maybe they don't have a background working with a triathlete. Not that that's, mandatory, but somebody is maybe not quite listening to your full story. So I think we have to be consumers in that way and be advocates for ourselves as we go and seek out those providers. And really, I'll tell people, if you go to a provider, and there's kind of this stigma that goes with each type of profession with medical providers, but if you can tell what they are, meaning that they're kind of a one-trick pony, or they've already come up with the treatment before they've even assessed or diagnosed you. For example, if you're working with a physical therapist and they're printing out the home exercise program, sending you home with a couple bands and just watching you do them, and really aren't taking a holistic approach, or a chiropractor who's planning to do the same 3 manipulations with you every time, regardless of what you come in reporting, or the orthopedic surgeon that's just looking to inject, or the medical provider that's just looking to give you a pill. You kind of get the idea. If they're just approaching the situation and not really listening to you, but just going with everything's a hammer. If they're holding a hammer, everything's looking like a nail. You really want to run away and avoid those situations. So, being open to being a consumer, looking at different options, and moving to somebody that really is listening to you and really giving you that holistic approach, and someone who's even willing to refer you to someone else if they think you're not the right one, or they're not the right one to help you out. Those are all very important parts of really aligning with a good provider that's going to help you get to where you want to go.